Good afternoon. My name is Michael May, and I'm the President and CEO of the Center for Commercialization of Regenerative Medicine, or CCRM. And it's my pleasure today to be a part of a panel put on by RegMedNet called The Business of Regenerative Medicine, and to be joined by a distinguished panel to talk about a number of issues in the fast-paced and ever-changing field of cell therapy and gene therapy. And so I'd like to begin by asking the panel to introduce themselves, and then we're going to tackle manufacturing challenges, obstacles in regenerative medicine. We're going to look at cell characterization and comparability, and we're going to end by talking about preservation, storage, and supply chain. So welcome, and let's get started. Bob?
Thank you, Michael. My name is Bob Preti. I'm the President and CEO of Hitachi Chemical Advanced Therapeutic Solutions and the General Manager of the Regenerative Medicine business sector at Hitachi Chemical Corporation. And I currently serve as the Chairman of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine. It's a pleasure to be here today. I've had the unique pleasure of having spent 30 some odd years in the industry, sort of before it was an industry, and we've seen tremendous amount of progress over the years, and it's an exciting time for us to have a discussion such as this. So thank you for the invitation.
Great. I'm Carolyn Yeago. I'm the Associate Director for the Marcus Center for Therapeutic Cell Characterization and Manufacturing, based at the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta. I am also very excited to join this esteemed panel this evening, or this afternoon, and look forward to the discussion. This is a newer center that got started about a year ago, and we're really looking to help advance the field when it comes to the characterization of these different therapies arising from the cells that are being manufactured.
Thank you, Michael. Robert Jones. I am Global Director of Advanced Therapies at Fisher Bioservices. So we're part of Thermo Fisher Scientific, and really involved in the downstream handling of cell and gene therapy, the management of the supply chain, and delivery of drugs to patients. My background originally was in blood transfusion, and I think there's a lot of similarities between the established supply chain in the blood transfusion industry and what the cell and gene therapy industry can learn whilst developing its supply chain strategy. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Michael. My name is Dr. Qasim Rafiq. I'm an Associate Professor at University College London in the Department of Biochemical Engineering. And my research focused primarily on the expansion and manufacture and bioprocessing of advanced therapies, in particular stem cell therapies and gene-based therapies. But really we try and take a whole bioprocess approach, so looking at everything from the initial characterization, isolation, manufacture of the material and the product, right the way through to delivery and cryopreservation, and ultimately the cost of goods and regulation involved in this field as well. So it's a pleasure to be part of the panel.
Excellent. CCRM is a translation center working with industry, academia, and investors to accelerate the translation of a pipeline of discovery in Canada from academia. And so, you know, with CCRM and with the group around the table here, we're really talking about the full value chain from academic research out to supply chain. So, but let's start by thinking about how much this field has changed. And let's make sure the panel, you know, we're talking a slightly different discussion than just talking about gaps and bottlenecks and challenges, but it really is changing and changing quickly. And I thought I'd like to get everyone to describe what the kind of the most profound changes have been over the last 2 years, and let's set the tone here around really this positive evolution that's happening in the field. So Bob, what really is astounding to you from 5, 10, 15 years ago about the field today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you know, if you start back 30 years ago, there were observations being made in laboratories such as mine and others that we could take cells, say cardiac cells, put them in a dish, they'd touch each other and they'd start to beat. And we said, wow, we can make hearts. Right?
Yeah.
And I think we had absolutely no idea what that journey would entail and the number of different disciplines that would be required in order to make that happen, make the journey. So I'd say for me, the thing that's really happened and what's accelerated over time there are two things. One is the number of enabling technologies and people and expertise and the different types of people, the disciplines, just sitting around this table where people come from, particularly the entrance of the engineers, because this is now an engineering challenge more than it is a biology challenge. And the other thing, of course, is that the products are now showing that they work, and that has transformed everything. Because we all knew that at the end of the day, we would have to show real transformative therapies to get these very complex therapies to be able to be produced. We'd have to have some driver. They would really have to show efficacy, and they've started to do that. So now all the dreams of people who thought, wow, we can make hearts, well, we are.
We're getting there.
Yeah.
Qasim, let's go over to this side.
Sure. I mean, I think as Bob has said, I mean, it's really inspiring to see how the field has transformed over the last, I would say, 10 years from my side. I mean, the way in which I think we've moved from a biologically focused industry to a more, now the challenges are manufacturing, engineering-led, which I think is a clear sign of progression. And ultimately, that's driven by the clinical efficacy we've seen. I think, we saw in the early years when I was first involved that the clinical efficacy wasn't just, it wasn't quite there. And there was, there were still challenges around mechanism of action, looking at potency and so on. But now we've seen some really transformative therapies. We're starting to now see an industry really emerge. And I think it's now, as Bob said, the engineers are getting involved, manufacturing teams are getting involved, big farmers are getting involved. And it's now not just the potential anymore. We're actually seeing products being regulated, coming to market. And I think the next challenge is how do we get those products from just being regulated to now being commercially viable, standing on their own 2 feet. For me, that will be, I think, the next milestone, but an exciting challenge as we move forward.
Rob.
Yeah, I echo Qasim's viewpoint, and I think especially the word excitement. Yes, there are challenges, and we don't want to focus on the challenges because everybody talks about challenges and obstacles and barriers. But I think that what's more important is the excitement around the fact that these drugs are working now. And I think the question has shifted. Whereas, years ago it was, how do we make these cells that when they bump together, they kind of beat in harmony? How do we turn that into a therapeutic product? How do we take what is essentially a very variable starting material and turn it into a consistent, efficacious product that's safe, well regulated? And also, the emphasis now is moving away from, how do we get these drugs into development, how do we scale them up, how do we make sure they work, to, how do we get them to patients? And how do we maintain the standardization when suddenly the drugs leave the manufacturing environment and now they're in clinical settings around the world in all sorts of variable environments? And also, questions over, is the healthcare system ready to deliver these drugs? Have we got enough trained people out in the clinical settings to administer these drugs and handle these drugs? Yeah. So I think the questions are just changing, as the industry matures, and I think it's a very exciting time to be part of it.
So I will kind of echo all of the comments around the table, but I'd like to add the thing that excites me the most is that there is a clearer sense now of collaboration. You mentioned the engineers coming in, the people from various different backgrounds. I think that now that we have the clinical efficacy, people have been utilizing and working with these cells on a small-scale basis for a few decades. We're beyond that point of trying to kind of protect and own it and figure it out all on our own. And you can just see that evidenced by you guys here at the table. We're all coming together to address these problems so that we can get these treatments out to the patients and so that the healthcare system can overcome some of its own issues. And speaking from the United States, we have several to overcome in order to get these treatments and therapies to patients. So I'm mostly excited about the increased collaboration and the work amongst academia, industry, and the government, actually. We have several initiatives with NIST and standards coordinating bodies in the U.S., as well as the FDA. They're getting involved earlier on in order so these things can have an impact and people can think about those regulatory hurdles earlier on in the process. So I find that extremely exciting.
I mean, I'm just amazed that people are going to pay for them. I mean, we have the first reimbursements and regulatory approvals based on efficacy. I mean, it's really, the discussion is really changing. So just very quickly, from each of your areas of expertise, what's the key bottleneck in your space? You know, Bob, in manufacturing, what do you got to deal with? What's the pain point for that area?
Industrialization is a combination of hitting really four main points, the way we like to look at it. One is sort of quality, robustness of production. Another is cost of goods, of course. Then there's the scalability, and there's the sustainability. I think the key challenge we have, we've moved on all of those points. We have higher quality production. The cost is still a major issue. In fact, if anything, the cost is one of our major challenges right now. Mainly because the therapies are not yet, from a manufacturing standpoint, scalable, and it's not sustainable for the long term or the commercial life of the product. Right. So the main challenge that I see being sort of on the manufacturing side of this and the development side and somewhat on the engineering side is that the clinical transformation that's happened, the clinical effectiveness, as Qasim said, right? They're efficacious and they're selling. They're going to go out.
Yeah.
That puts, all of a sudden, that puts us in the CMC side of the world chasing after, trying to make them really deliverable. Right. And the emphasis now is on manufacturing, and people say, wow, it's manufacturing. Right. But the bigger challenge has been we haven't shown they work, right? So now the clinic has just zoomed past us.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And now we're playing catch up. So to me, it's the ability to catch up fast enough so that we don't have a disappointment out in the marketplace.
The patient access disappointment. We've got to deliver these en masse in patients.
Yeah, deliverability.
Rob, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, things have changed. We're talking about supply chain. What's the big? What's the pain point?
And that's, you know, it's really interesting. Just going back to how the focus is changing, you know, through scale up of manufacturing, and now, you know, scaling up in one part of the process flow could easily produce a bottleneck, you know, further downstream, and we have to work and you know, part of this collaboration between these groups is making sure that all elements of the process flow can be scaled at the same time. You know, some of the issues that are faced in supply chain is as soon as you start scaling up manufacturing, we'd have to keep up to essentially scale up a very, very manual, you know, labor-intensive process, you know, in terms of, you know, if you're storing, for example, just take an allogeneic product that needs to be packaged and labeled at cryogenic temperatures and shipped one by one in cryogenic dry shippers. It's not a very scalable process. You know, we in the industry have to look at ways of, you know, improving efficiencies, increasing productivity, reducing costs, because this is a very expensive process. But of course, we're dealing with products that are difficult to automate these processes. It's not like in small molecule where you can have automated blistering lines and things like that that can scale up very easily. You know, we have an obligation now to look at ways that we can streamline the process for getting these drugs to patients. Ensuring as well that there isn't then just a bottleneck at the clinical end as well. That needs to be resolved as well.
Right. Carolyn, in your space.
So I was going to kind of go back to this idea of characterization and understanding the product. So when it comes to scaling up manufacturing and doing this on a larger scale, right now we are still relatively in the space of a recipe-based manufacturing process. You follow a series of steps, but those steps are not always understood as to their implication on the quality or the potency or efficacy of the product on the back end. And so we think that that is an area where we can take the next step to develop the next generation inline monitoring capabilities. Hopefully, eventually, feedback and inline process parameters can come in to help with the manufacturing scale. But in order to do that, you have to understand how all of the steps in your current process affect the product, and you need to understand what characteristics of that product are actually critical to its efficacy. And I think that that's a big bottleneck that we have right now. While we're having the clinical efficacy. And for some products, we know very clearly what those parameters are that we need to measure. The new products that are in the pipeline, we still have to figure it out. And from other companies and groups that have commercialized that, it could take 5 years or more to define their critical quality attributes. And then we've got to get our regulatory bodies on the same page to accept new release criteria, new characterization methods, and accept those validated methods of manufacturing processes.
We're going to get more to that later. So Qasim, in bioprocessing, what's the one thing that you think we need to focus on?
I think from my perspective, it's I mean, echoing what's just been said, I mean, I think it's certainly an issue of understanding the product better, getting the enabling tools and technologies. And I think the key thing is not just taking what has been developed for biotech and biopharma and thinking that will solve the problems for this industry. And I think we're learning that now. And there are now bespoke platforms and systems which are being developed for this particular space as well. But I think ultimately it comes down to one of the key challenges at the moment that we're still finding is high cost of goods. And that then requires better technologies and improved understanding of processes. And as Carolyn mentioned, having those systems that enable us to measure things online, real time, non-invasively, ideally, so that we can then develop this patient-specific material and have some of these successes in clinic.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
There's a race in the industry now to, as we've all been saying, with these work, people want to get out there, they want to sell them and start having patients benefit from access to these therapies. And I think the danger that I was referring to before about us playing catch up is that the solution is, this word automation. We're just going to automate the process. We're going to tip to tip. We're going to put it into a box, and it's going to come out, and it's all going to be fine, and it'll be by the bedside.
Yeah.
And that's the disappointment that I'm worried about, right?
Yeah.
Because that right now, these are first-generation manufacturing processes. In my view, and there are people that disagree, so fair enough. But it's not time to wrap this into a single unit operation that can just do everything. These processes are going to evolve over time, and locking them down like that limits our ability to make better medicines, to make them less expensive. But you may be able to reduce the cost by doing that for a little while, but it's not scalable and it's not sustainable.
I think that's the key thing. It's certainly not scalable, and it's not flexible enough.
No.
Because
Not
your
flexible
processes
enough,
will
no.
change. I mean, and that's really the idea behind this industry, is that as you learn more about your product, you improve the process.
Right.
And if you have a locked-in technology,
can't
it
do that.
reduces the scalability ultimately, but it doesn't allow you to then adapt the process based on the new information you have. And I think, I think the key, and like I said, I think at the beginning, the key opportunity I now see is it's moving away from a clinical or a biological industry now to let's sort the manufacturing process.
Right.
And that for
Bringing
me is
more of the engineering.
exactly, and
Right.
that's a key sign of success.
But engineering can be flexible, and it's not just a box that can do everything
Right,
for
no.
everyone.
No,
and
absolutely.
That's what we're.
No, absolutely.
That's what we
I
have
mean,
to avoid.
the reason
Right.
the engineering approach is so important is because it takes a step back, it looks at what we're trying to
Yes,
accomplish,
absolutely.
And it
and looks at what the
defines-
limits are, and then defines it.
And,
right?
and,
So-
and, 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 and I
parameters.
think
Yeah.
also it
No, it's
it allows us to redefine the manufacturing process. I mean, many of these technologies, I think we've assumed a biotech, biopharma type model for manufacture, but I think in
Yeah.
this instance, we can actually look at patient-specific therapies, a whole new manufacturing paradigm. Let's think creatively about this and start thinking, well, how can we bring down the costs, still retain the flexibility, and deliver these therapies to patients in a way that makes it commercially
Right.
viable?
And the cost issue is so interesting because of the demand issue that comes along with that, right? Because not only are companies now trying to deliver these therapies, the patients want the therapies, but the researchers, the basic researchers, the translational researchers, all need the same products. And so there's a high demand for a lot of these that are going to start to enable the research that we're going to do, the translational processes, and that cost paradigm I find intriguing, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how do we manage that?
Well, it's a
Can it
matter.
be
You
managed?
mentioned that bringing everybody has their own recipe,
Right.
And we because we see so many different products as a contract development and manufacturing company. People come to us with a process, and a traditional CDMO is able to say, I've got a platform, and I can adjust my platform slightly to create your molecule, which is extremely well defined.
Right.
And we'll talk about comparability
Yeah,
later,
yeah.
but it's my
It's
view, we're
important.
never going to define these products,
Yeah.
right, to the extent that we define a biologic, right? We'll get much closer, and good work, you can do a great job, but we're not going to ever get to the
Yeah.
point where we can fully understand them.
Yeah.
Right.
So once we have that pathway, right, that we're now We know that these processes are all quite different than one another, but they have commonality. Everybody comes with grandma's recipe for cookies and says, you have to make the cookies just the way grandma makes them. I can't tell you what's in that cookie, but if you change any part of that process, the cookie will be
Right.
different. So we have to figure out what the engineering trick here is going to be, is to figure what are those commonalities, remove the complexity from this, add some consistency, and platformatize.
Platformatize.
We call it platformation, right? You know, create some platform out of it that's not quite a biologics platform, but it's not bespoke instruments for every unit operation
Right,
tied
and
together.
some of that will come from real-time analysis, different biosensors, artificial intelligence, being able to.
Better understanding of the
to-
process.
Yeah, but,
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
exactly.
but, so let's just throw this out. It's been asked many times before. Is the process the product still? Where are we?
God,
Yeah.
no. If the process is the product, you don't have a
So I
product.
see. I knew you were going to answer that.
don't
way.
have a
But
product.
that's a
We-
nice that's an evolution. People are not talking that way anymore. It's good. The
It
product
is good.
the product is the
You do
product.
hear it less
Yeah,
now
the-
than you
Yeah.
used to hear, but it's always been something that creates, you know, shivers
And
in
again,
your
I
spine.
think that's the legacy of biotech. I mean, that's where
Yeah.
that mantra came from. And I think it is almost breaking of the shackles. And what's really interesting for me is to see across the industry this shift from almost hanging on the coattails of biotech and trying to get that almost attention. There is now an industry which is viable, which
Yeah.
is emerging, which big pharma's keen to try and tap into, and we now have clinical success. For me, that has been the key driver. I think until we had real clinical success, where we could show that we could treat, you know, significant indications, great clinical data, that is now what I think has allowed the industry to stand on its own 2 feet, to say, well, we're still in the infancy, there's still lots of challenges, but we can now build on this platform.
So let's, like, on the table here, throw out a design for manufacturing of the future. What is it going to consist of that is able to, you know, be flexible and accommodating, but be able to define and control these variable products? What does it look like? Let's end now and think about in the future. What is the facility of the future?
If
Who
I
wants to
told
start
you, I'd
there?
have to kill you.
You can tell us some piece of it.
Yeah, we're all looking at you, Bob.
Yeah. Well, we've been thinking about it. We've been working on it. I mean, the primary reason why we sold our company to Hitachi Chemical Corporation was because of the massive amount of engineering, application engineering expertise the company has. We went from 17 engineers in what we call the Center for Innovation and Engineering to, I don't know, 170,000 engineers or something, right? That make everything on the planet, that can just make anything.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think what I can say is we call it the Superior Delivery Platform, and it's made up of a number of elements. Information systems are a huge part of
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Just
Absolutely.
information gathering, data, tying all that together. The next layer of that is a platform that is for us, a global platform harmonized around the world. So it's the same wherever you go. And so as you put something in Europe, you can actually transfer that to some other facility and not have a
So
comparability.
so integration of the liquid side among many different unit operations, which doesn't exist in many places
that's
right
the next
now.
layer. The next layer is to layer on top of that, right, is to
Right.
have the unit operation approach, to
Right.
understand exactly what you need, inputs and outputs of
Right.
each unit
And
operation.
can change from
And
product
each
to
one of
product.
those
Yeah.
is adaptable enough
Absolutely.
Yeah.
to meet the demands of every cell product that's out there, right? I honestly don't think it's rocket science. It's just a matter of not thinking,
Right.
let's just put ourselves into a device that's made for my product, right?
Right, and you can make it specific to each product by that data that you're collecting.
Yeah,
And
That's it. That's the platform.
that's
Yeah.
the
So
platform.
integration of
platform.
data, integration on the liquid side, and
Yep.
And I think
what else?
I think modular systems. I mean,
Modular.
I think that and which you can harmonize the technology, and I think that's always been a downfall of the industry, that we have technologies which we can't connect together, and
Yeah.
even simple things such as connectors. I think harmonizing that, having standards in place, I think is critical to this industry, and and also that harmonization between standards, regulation, and the manufacturing strategy, I think is all relevant to this. But for me, it's going to be a flexible, modular type system where, going back to that word automation, but I'd rather use a different word, autonomy, where you have a system based on the data that you're collecting, that you are able to start having a system that can almost make decisions based on certain parameters and so on and so on. And I think we're starting to see that. I mean, we're seeing some very nice things emerge from Novartis's work and so on, where they're thinking along these sorts of lines, and I think that will be the way that we move forward in this industry.
Obviously, we're getting rid of clean rooms where everything is closed.
I think if we're still
I mean,
if we
that's
still have
obvious.
open manufacturing platforms run by humans in clean rooms, then I think we're in trouble.
If we have clean rooms in 5 years, we're in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. But there's no indication that we're not on that trend. I mean, there's
No,
lots
it's
of work
clearly
going
on
on there.
it.
yeah.
And they will exist for the early phase products.
Yeah,
It's okay.
exactly.
I mean, it's a whole progression, but by the time you're moving into phase 3 and certainly
Exactly.
commercial,
Yeah.
Exactly.
we have to be out of that model. We do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
And we will be.
So why don't we end there? But thank you very much. Is that how you want to do it?